The crimson Arizona sunset bled across the horizon as Zara Vellum stood on the auction block, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang desperate for escape. It was 1872, and Gila City, a dusty mining settlement in Arizona territory that had seen better days, had gathered for the most shameful kind of commerce. The sale of a woman whose only crime was bearing 3 daughters instead of sons. $500 for the woman, called the auctioneer, his voice carrying across the crowd of weathered faces. Healthy, can cook, clean, and birth children. Previous owner guarantees she's fertile, just hasn't produced sons. Zara kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to meet the eyes of those who viewed her as merchandise. The 24-year-old woman's auburn hair had been roughly pinned beneath a tattered bonnet, but several strands escaped, dancing against her tear-stained cheeks. Her hands, bound with coarse rope, trembled slightly. Behind the crowd, Charles Vellum, her husband of 6 years, stood with their youngest daughter, 2-year-old Lucy, squirming in his arms. Their other daughters, 5-year-old Mary and 4-year-old Emma, clung to his legs, confusion written across their innocent faces. They were too young to understand why their mother stood upon that platform, or why their father had announced last week that he would trade her in for a model that works proper. "Do I hear 600? The auctioneer pressed. "Woman comes from good stock. Previous owner just requires a son for his legacy." A few men in the crowd chuckled. Others shifted uncomfortably, this particular brand of frontier commerce sitting poorly even with men who had witnessed all manner of cruelty in the West. 700, called a voice from the back, causing Zara to flinch. She'd refused to look at the bidders, but something in this voice, deep, clear, and threaded with barely contained anger, drew her attention. The crowd parted as a tall man strode forward. His clothes weren't the flashy attire of a gambler or the rough garments of a miner, but the practical outfit of a working rancher, worn leather chaps over denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed piercing blue eyes. A star-shaped badge gleamed on his chest. "Deputy Ross Parker," someone whispered, loud enough for Zara to hear. The auctioneer grinned. 700 from the deputy. "Do I hear 8? Silence fell across the gathering. Even Charles Vellum seemed to shrink back, clutching little Lucy tighter as if she were a shield. 700 going once. The auctioneer began, but Ross Parker cut him off. "Before you continue, I'd like to address something," the deputy said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that silenced the murmuring crowd. "Mr. Vellum there believes his wife has failed him because she's given him daughters instead of sons." Charles Vellum's face darkened. "That's my business, Parker. It becomes the town's business when you try to sell a person in the town square," Ross retorted, then turned to face the gathering. "I grew up with 5 sisters. My pa used to say daughters are a blessing too. They keep your heart soft in a hard world." His words hung in the air, creating a palpable tension. "Now, is there another bid?" the auctioneer asked nervously, looking between the deputy and Charles Vellum. No one spoke. Even the most hardened men in the crowd seemed unwilling to challenge the deputy. 700 going once, going twice. Sold to Deputy Parker. Ross stepped forward, removing his hat as he approached the auction block. His eyes met Zara's for the first time, blue as the Arizona sky, meeting hazel eyes swimming with tears of humiliation and relief. "Mrs. Vellum," he said quietly, extending his hand to help her down, "I'd like to offer you a choice that you've been denied. My ranch has a caretaker's cabin that stands empty. You and your daughters are welcome to it, with no obligations beyond taking care of yourselves." Zara stared at him, stunned by the unexpected offer. "Why would you do this?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of silent crying. "Because no one deserves to be sold like cattle," he replied simply. Then he added in a lower voice, "And no child should be valued less for being a girl." Charles Vellum pushed forward, still clutching Lucy while the other two girls trailed behind him. "The children stay with me. She failed as a wife, but they're my blood." Ross turned, his expression hardening. "The law says differently, Vellum. You sold your marriage rights when you put your wife on that block. The children go with their mother unless she chooses otherwise." "You can't," Charles began, but the deputy cut him off. "I can and I will, unless you want me looking into your mining claims more carefully. I hear there's been some question about those boundaries you've been pushing with the Wilcox property." Charles's face paled. He looked from Ross to Zara, then down at Lucy in his arms. With a scowl, he set the toddler down roughly. "Take them all then. Useless bunch anyway." He spun on his heel and stormed away, not even glancing back at the daughters he had so easily discarded. Little Lucy began to wail, confused and frightened. Zara rushed to gather her children, kneeling in the dust to embrace all three at once, her tears flowing freely now. "Mama, why is Papa angry?" Mary asked, her small face scrunched with worry. "Shh, darling," Zara soothed, brushing Mary's dark curls from her forehead. "Everything will be all right now." She looked up to find Ross Parker standing awkwardly nearby, his hat in his hands. The crowd had begun to disperse, some casting sympathetic glances toward Zara and her daughters, others avoiding looking at them altogether. "My wagon is just over there," Ross said, gesturing toward a sturdy vehicle hitched to two chestnut horses. "You have belongings somewhere." "Just a trunk at the boarding house," Zara replied, rising with Lucy in her arms while Emma and Mary pressed against her skirts. "Charles. He sold almost everything else to pay his gambling debts." Ross nodded, his jaw tight. "We'll collect it on the way." "Can you manage to walk there, or would you like me to carry one of the little ones?" Emma, always the shy one, hid her face in her mother's skirt, but Mary, bold as brass even at 5, stepped forward and looked up at the tall deputy. "Are you going to be our new papa?" she asked plainly. Zara gasped. "Mary, that's not," but Ross Parker knelt down to the child's level, his expression gentle. "No, Miss Mary, I'm just a friend who's offering you and your mama and sisters a safe place to stay. Nothing more complicated than that." Mary studied him with the frank assessment only a child could manage. "Our old papa didn't like us 'cause we're girls." Ross smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "Well, that's where your old papa and I disagree entirely. I happen to think little girls are the finest people on earth." Mary considered this, then nodded solemnly. "I think I like you better than him anyway." "Mary," Zara scolded, mortified, but Ross just laughed as he rose to his feet. "Honest as the day is long," he commented. "That's a good quality." He reached out hesitantly. "May I help with Lucy? She looks heavy." After a moment's hesitation, Zara allowed him to take the toddler, who regarded him warily before becoming distracted by his shiny badge. As they walked toward the boarding house, Zara felt the weight of stares from townspeople who had witnessed her humiliation. She kept her gaze forward, her spine straight despite the shame burning through her. She would not break, not in front of her daughters, who needed her strength now more than ever. "People will talk," she murmured to Ross as they walked, Mary's small hand clutched in hers while Emma continued to press close to her side. "People always talk in Gila City," he replied. "Precious little else to do here except mine, drink, and gossip. But talk fades when there's nothing to fuel it." Zara nodded, though she wasn't convinced. A woman living alone on a deputy's property, after being sold by her husband, the gossip would be vicious. At the boarding house, The landlady, Mrs. Whitmore, greeted them with unconcealed curiosity. "Deputy Parker," she said with a nod, then turned questioning eyes to Zara. "Mrs. Vellum, I heard there was some unpleasantness in the square today. Mrs. Vellum and her daughters will be staying at my ranch," Ross explained briskly. "We've come for her trunk." Mrs. Whitmore's eyebrows nearly disappeared into her hairline. "I see," she said, in a tone that suggested she saw all manner of impropriety. "In the caretaker's cabin," Ross added firmly. "Mrs. Vellum will be taking over those duties while she decides her future plans." The landlady's expression softened slightly. "Well, that's sensible enough, I suppose." She turned to Zara. "Your trunk is still upstairs, dear. Charles paid through the week, so there was no need to move it." Zara nodded her thanks, too exhausted for words. "I'll fetch it," Ross offered, setting Lucy down gently. "Which room?" "Last door on the right," Mrs. Whitmore directed. "And deputy, what you did today, it was decent. More than decent." Ross acknowledged her words with a nod before heading upstairs. When they finally arrived at the Parker Ranch as dusk deepened into night, Zara was overwhelmed by the sheer expanse of it. Unlike the cramped quarters she'd shared with Charles in town, the ranch spread out beneath the star-filled sky, with rolling pastures and distant silhouettes of grazing cattle. The main house stood solidly built of timber and stone, while a smaller but well-maintained cabin sat about 50 yards away. "That's the caretaker's place," Ross explained, helping her down from the wagon. "My last ranch hand left 3 months ago to strike out for California. It's been sitting empty since then." Carrying Lucy, who had fallen asleep during the journey, Zara followed Ross to the cabin. Mary and Emma trailed behind, too tired to ask the countless questions that had been bubbling from them earlier. The cabin was simple but clean, with 2 rooms, a main living area with a cookstove, table, and chairs, plus a small bedroom with a proper bed. A trundle bed was tucked underneath for the children. "It's not fancy," Ross said apologetically, lighting a lamp that cast a warm glow around the space. "But it's solid. No leaks, good stove, and I'll bring wood for the fireplace before I head back to town." Zara stood in the center of the room, still cradling Lucy, and felt something she hadn't expected, a sense of peace. "It's perfect," she whispered, meaning it. "I don't know how to thank you." Ross shifted uncomfortably. "No need for thanks, just doing what's right." He set her trunk down near the bedroom door. "I'll bring in some wood and water, then leave you folks to settle in. There's some basic provisions in the cupboard: flour, coffee, salt, pork. Should get you through tomorrow. I'll bring more supplies when I come back from town." While he busied himself with these tasks, Zara put the exhausted children to bed. Lucy didn't even wake as Zara removed her dusty shoes and dress, tucking her into the trundle beside her sisters. Mary and Emma were too tired for their usual bedtime stories, falling asleep almost as soon as their heads touched the pillows. When Zara emerged from the bedroom, she found Ross stoking a small fire in the hearth. "The nights can get chilly out here, even in summer," he explained, straightening up. "You should be comfortable now." Zara stood awkwardly by the table, suddenly aware of being alone with this stranger who had rescued her from unimaginable degradation. "Deputy Parker, Ross," he interrupted gently. "Just Ross is fine." "Ross," she amended. "I still don't understand why you did this. $700 it's a fortune." He looked at her directly, his expression solemn. "My mother was sold much the same way when I was 10 years old. My father decided 4 sons wasn't enough to compensate for having 5 daughters." His voice was steady, but Zara could hear the old pain beneath the words. "She was purchased by a man who took her to San Francisco. I never saw her again." Zara's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry." Ross shrugged, but the casualness of the gesture didn't match the tightness around his eyes. It happens more than people want to admit, but it shouldn't. Not ever. He reached for his hat, which he'd placed on the table. I'll be staying in town tonight, have to finish my deputy rounds. But my ranch hand, Miguel, lives in the bunkhouse with his wife, Teresa. They'll check on you in the morning. Zara nodded, watching as he moved toward the door. Ross, she called softly, stopping him. When he turned, she continued, what you said about daughters being a blessing. Did you really mean that? His smile was gentle but genuine. Every word. My sisters saved my life in more ways than one after our mother was gone, taught me how to see the world differently than most men do. He settled his hat on his head. Get some rest, Mrs. Vellum. Tomorrow will be a better day. After he left, Zara stood for a long time by the window, watching his tall figure disappear toward the main house where he collected his horse before riding toward town. The night was quiet except for the occasional lowing of cattle and the soft chorus of crickets, so different from the constant noise of Gila City with its saloons and mining operations. For the first time in years, Zara felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. Whatever tomorrow brought, it had to be better than the life she was leaving behind. She checked on her sleeping daughters once more before crawling into bed, her body aching with the emotional toll of the day. Yet despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she stared at the ceiling, wondering what twist of fate had brought Deputy Ross Parker to that auction today, and whether she dared believe in the possibility of a new beginning. The morning light filtered through the cabin's small windows, waking Zara from a fitful sleep. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day crashed back the auction block, Charles's cold dismissal, and the unexpected intervention of Deputy Ross Parker. A soft knock at the door startled her. Hastily pulling on her dress, she crossed to the door, opening it cautiously to find a smiling woman in her 30s holding a basket. Buenos dias, the woman greeted warmly. I am Teresa Diaz. My husband Miguel works for Senor Ross. He told us you would be staying in the caretaker's cabin. Zara self-consciously smoothed her wrinkled dress. Yes, I'm Zara Vellum. My daughters are still asleep. Teresa nodded, extending the basket. I brought fresh bread and eggs for your breakfast, and milk for the little ones. Touched by the thoughtful gesture, Zara accepted the basket. Thank you. That's very kind. It is nothing, Teresa said, waving away the thanks. Miguel and I live just over there. She pointed toward a smaller building beyond the main house. If you need anything, you come to us. I have 5 children of my own. They will be happy to have new friends to play with. The thought of her daughters having playmates brought unexpected tears to Zara's eyes. In town, many families had kept their distance, Charles's gambling debts and increasingly erratic behavior making them unwelcome in polite society. Teresa noticed her emotion and patted her arm gently. It is hard starting again, but this is a good place. Senor Ross, he is a good man. Before Zara could respond, small footsteps pattered behind her and Mary appeared, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mama, I'm hungry. Teresa beamed at the child. And I have brought breakfast for hungry little girls. Come, I will help you prepare it while your mama gets ready for the day. To Zara's surprise, Mary didn't display her usual shyness around strangers. Instead, she regarded Teresa with solemn curiosity before nodding agreement. Do you have children? Mary asked as Teresa entered the cabin. 5, Teresa answered proudly. My oldest, Gabriela, is 12. Then I have twins, Luisa and Carlos, who are 8. Roberto is 6, and my baby, Alina, is 3. Mary's eyes widened. That's a lot. Teresa laughed. But each one is a treasure. She glanced at Zara with understanding in her dark eyes, Perhaps your mama will let you meet them later." By mid-morning, Zara had begun to take stock of her new situation. The cabin, while basic, was clean and sturdy, far better than some of the places she'd lived with Charles when money was tight. Teresa had helped prepare breakfast, then shown her where the well and outhouse were located before returning to her own duties. Emma and Lucy were now playing contentedly on a quilt Zara had spread in the shade of a large oak tree near the cabin, while Mary had insisted on helping by sweeping the cabin's porch with a broom Teresa had provided. The sound of approaching hoofbeats caused Zara to look up from where she was hanging freshly washed nightclothes on a line Teresa had helped her string. Ross Parker rode toward the cabin, leading a second horse that pulled a small cart loaded with supplies. Mary abandoned her sweeping to run toward him, calling out, "Deputy Ross, look, I'm helping Mama." Ross dismounted, smiling at the child's enthusiasm. "I can see that. You're doing a fine job, Miss Mary." He tipped his hat to Zara. "Good morning, Mrs. Vellum. I've brought those supplies I mentioned." Zara hurriedly wiped her hands on her apron, conscious of her disheveled appearance. "You didn't have to do that so quickly. We could have managed." "No trouble," he replied, beginning to unload parcels from the cart. "I was coming back this way anyhow." Mary tugged at his sleeve. "Teresa says she has 5 children. Can we meet them?" Ross chuckled. "I expect you can. They're good kids." He handed Mary a small paper bag. "Speaking of children, I thought you 3 might like these." Mary peered inside, then let out a delighted gasp. "Candy sticks." She looked up at Ross with newfound admiration. "Are they really for us?" "Really and truly," he confirmed. "One for each of you. Why don't you take them to your sisters while I help your mother with these supplies?" As Mary raced off to share the treats, Zara shook her head. "You'll spoil them." "They deserve a little spoiling after what they've been through," Ross said, his tone more serious. He lifted a heavy sack of flour from the cart. "Where would you like these things?" They worked together to bring the supplies inside: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, salt pork, potatoes, a slab of bacon, even a small jar of molasses and a packet of tea. Zara was overwhelmed by the generosity. "This is too much," she protested as Ross set down the last bundle. "How can I possibly repay you? You're working as my caretaker now, remember?" he reminded her. "Consider this part of your wages." Seeing her skeptical expression, he added, "The arrangement needs to be practical for both of us, Mrs. Vellum. I've been without a proper caretaker for 3 months. The vegetable garden is overrun with weeds, and the cabin needs a woman's touch to keep it in good order." "Zara," she said impulsively. "If I'm to call you Ross, then you should call me Zara." He nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Zara, then." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when Lucy toddled into the cabin, her face sticky with candy. "Look, Mama," she exclaimed, holding up the half-eaten candy stick. "Sweet," Ross laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I see you're enjoying that." Lucy regarded him shyly, then held out what remained of her candy. "Want some?" The simple, generous gesture seemed to touch something deep in Ross. He knelt down to the child's level. "That's mighty kind of you, Miss Lucy, but that's your special treat. You enjoy every bit of it." Lucy nodded solemnly before turning to press herself against Zara's skirts, suddenly overcome with shyness again. "I should let you get back to your day," Ross said, rising. "I've got to check the north pasture fence line had reports of some damaged sections." He hesitated, then added, "Teresa mentioned inviting your girls to play with her children. It's a good idea, might help them feel more at home here." "I think they'd like that," Zara agreed, surprising herself with how quickly she was willing to trust these strangers. But there was something about Ross Parker and the Diaz family that inspired confidence. As Ross turned to leave, Zara found herself asking, "Will you join us for supper tonight?" As a small thank you for everything. I'm a decent cook, even with simple ingredients. The invitation seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. I wouldn't want to impose, you wouldn't be, she assured him. It's the least I can do. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. I'd be honored. Around sundown. Perfect, she replied, wondering what had possessed her to issue such an invitation when she'd known the man barely a day. Yet there was something about his straightforward kindness that made her want to know him better, to understand what kind of man would spend a small fortune to rescue a woman and 3 children he didn't even know. After Ross departed, Zara set about organizing the cabin properly, putting away the supplies and taking inventory of what utensils and cookware were available. To her relief, the cabin was reasonably well equipped, if a bit dusty from disuse. By mid-afternoon, Teresa arrived with her children in tow. The introductions were slightly chaotic but filled with laughter as the children sized each other up. Within minutes, Mary and Roberto were engaged in a serious discussion about a frog they'd spotted near the well, while Emma cautiously allowed Louisa to show her a rag doll she'd brought. Even shy Lucy was won over by 3-year-old Alina's offer to share a stick she'd found that was shaped like a horse. As the children played under Teresa's watchful eye, Zara seized the opportunity to start preparing for supper. She decided on a simple but hearty meal of biscuits, beans with salt pork, and fried potatoes, comfort food that reminded her of happier times before Charles's gambling had consumed their lives. Teresa joined her at the cook stove, skillfully kneading dough while Zara chopped potatoes. The children get along well, she observed, nodding toward where all 8 were now engaged in an elaborate game involving the stick horse and what appeared to be a rescue mission. They do, Zara agreed, grateful for how easily her daughters had adapted to these new playmates. I was worried they'd be shy, especially after everything that's happened. Teresa worked the dough with practiced hands. Children are more resilient than we think. My Roberto was only 4 when we came from Mexico. Miguel had work waiting with Senor Ross, but still, it was hard leaving our home. She shaped the dough into perfect biscuits, placing them on a baking sheet. Children adjust. They find joy where they can. Zara watched her daughters laughing with their new friends and felt a knot in her chest loosen slightly. They deserve so much better than what their father gave them. Teresa's expression grew serious. Miguel told me what happened in town yesterday. Such a thing. She shook her head in disapproval. But Senor Ross, he is different from most men. He sees people really sees them, not just what use they have. How long have you known him? Zara asked, curious about the man who had so unexpectedly changed her fate. 5 years now. He bought this ranch when the old owner died. Many thought a young deputy couldn't manage such a place, but he proved them wrong. Teresa slid the biscuits into the oven. He works hard, too hard sometimes. Rides as deputy 3 days a week in town, then works the ranch the rest of the time. He mentioned sisters, Zara said carefully, not wanting to pry but eager to understand more about Ross. 5 of them, all married now, living scattered across Arizona and California. They write often. Teresa lowered her voice, though the children were too engrossed in their play to listen. There was a woman once, about 2 years ago, a school teacher from back east. Everyone thought they would marry, but she returned home suddenly. He never speaks of her. Before Zara could respond to this intriguing piece of information, Gabriella, Teresa's eldest, came running up to the cabin. Mama, Papa says there's a rattlesnake near the chicken coop. He needs your help with the chickens while he kills it. Teresa immediately wiped her hands on her apron. I must go. Will you be all right to finish the biscuits? Of course, Zara assured her. Should I keep all the children here, please? I'll return when it's safe. Teresa hurried after her daughter, calling instructions to the other children to stay with Mrs. Vellum until she returned. Zara gathered the children onto the porch, distracting them from the snake situation by suggesting they help her prepare a special dessert, simple molasses cookies, that required many little hands for mixing and shaping. The activity kept them occupied until Teresa returned nearly an hour later, announcing that the snake had been disposed of and all was well. As the afternoon waned toward evening, Teresa and her children departed after extracting promises for future play sessions. Zara bathed her daughters using water she'd heated on the stove, dressed them in their cleanest clothes, and set about finalizing preparations for supper. She was just removing the last of the biscuits from the oven when a knock sounded at the door. Mary raced to answer it, flinging the door wide to reveal Ross Parker standing on the porch. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His shirt was fresh, his hair damp from a recent washing, and he'd trimmed his beard. Right on time for supper. Mary announced happily, taking his hand and pulling him inside with the easy familiarity of a child who had already decided someone was a friend. Ross allowed himself to be led, though he looked slightly uncomfortable at the enthusiastic welcome. "I brought something," he said, holding out a small paper-wrapped package to Zara. "Just a little extra for supper." Inside was a pound of fresh beef, a luxury Zara hadn't been able to afford for months. "This is wonderful," she exclaimed, "but I've already prepared everything." "Save it for tomorrow," he suggested. "Looks like you've got a fine meal ready already." The simple supper turned out to be one of the most pleasant meals Zara could remember in years. Ross entertained the girls with stories of clever horses and funny incidents from his deputy work, carefully edited for young ears, while they peppered him with questions about everything from his badge to whether he'd ever shot a bad guy. "Only when absolutely necessary," he answered seriously to the latter question. "A gun is a last resort, not a first choice." "Our papa had a gun," Emma volunteered unexpectedly, her quiet voice drawing everyone's attention. "He would shoot it in the air when he came home late and was angry." An uncomfortable silence fell. Ross set down his fork, regarding Emma with gentle eyes. "That doesn't sound very responsible," he said carefully. "It was scary," Emma continued, staring at her plate. "Mama would hide us in the cupboard sometimes when he was really angry." Zara felt her cheeks burn with shame. She tried so hard to shield her daughters from Charles's drunken rages, but clearly they'd absorbed more than she'd realized. "Well," Ross said after a moment, his voice deliberately light, "there's no need for cupboard hiding here. This is a peaceful place." He caught Zara's eye across the table, his gaze conveying understanding rather than judgment. After supper, Ross insisted on helping clean up despite Zara's protests. Mary appointed herself his assistant, solemnly drying each plate he washed and handing it to Zara to put away. The domestic scene felt so natural that Zara had to remind herself they were virtual strangers, that this man had no obligation to them beyond the rental of the cabin. When the kitchen was tidy, Ross announced it was time for him to head back to the main house. "I've got an early start tomorrow. Cattle to move to the south pasture." "Can we watch?" Mary asked eagerly. "I've never seen real cowboys working before." Ross glanced at Zara, raising an eyebrow in question. She nodded, seeing no reason to refuse. "If your mother approves, I don't see why not. Miguel and I could use some cheering section when we move those stubborn beeves." As he prepared to leave, Lucy, who had been fighting sleep for the past hour, suddenly climbed down from Zara's lap and toddled over to Ross. Without a word, she raised her arms in the universal toddler request to be picked up. Surprised, Ross hesitated before lifting her gently. Lucy immediately rested her head against his shoulder with a contented sigh, her eyes drifting closed. "She likes you," Mary observed matter-of-factly. "She doesn't like most people." Ross stood awkwardly holding the drowsy child, a complex emotion crossing his face that Zara couldn't quite identify. "She's just tired," he said softly, but his arms cradled Lucy with careful tenderness. Zara rose to take her daughter. "She needs to be in bed." "All of you do," she added to Mary and Emma. After transferring the now sleeping Lucy to Zara's arms, Ross retrieved his hat from the peg by the door. "Thank you for supper. Best meal I've had in months." "Thank you for everything," Zara replied, meaning far more than just the supplies or the cabin. "I don't know what would have become of us if you hadn't been there yesterday." Ross's expression grew serious. "I'm glad I was." He settled his hat on his head, nodding a farewell. "Tomorrow, then, for the cattle drive." After he left, Zara put her daughters to bed, her mind turning over the events of the past 2 days. In 48 hours, her life had transformed completely from the desperate wife of a gambling man to a woman with at least temporary independence and security. And yet, as she lay in her own bed later, staring at the cabin's wooden ceiling, she couldn't help but wonder how long this respite would last. Charles might have discarded them, but she wasn't naive enough to believe he would simply vanish from their lives. And then, there was the matter of Ross Parker himself, a man who seemed too good to be true, with his quiet strength and unexpected kindness. Zara had learned the hard way that men usually wanted something in return for their generosity. The question that kept her awake far into the night was, what would Ross Parker eventually expect from her? The weeks that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm of peaceful routine. Each morning, Zara woke with the dawn to prepare breakfast for her daughters, before tackling the caretaker duties Ross had outlined, tending the vegetable garden, keeping the cabin and its surroundings neat, feeding the small flock of chickens that provided fresh eggs. The girls quickly adjusted to ranch life, spending their days playing with the Diaz children, helping with age-appropriate chores, and exploring the safer parts of the ranch under Teresa's watchful eye when Zara was busy. Ross maintained a respectful distance, typically checking in once a day to see if they needed anything, but otherwise allowing them space to settle into their new lives. He joined them for supper once a week, a tradition that began at Zara's invitation, but soon became an eagerly anticipated routine, especially for the girls who adored his stories and gentle teasing. It was during the third of these weekly suppers, nearly a month after their arrival at the ranch, that Mary asked the question that had been forming in Zara's own mind. "Deputy Ross," she began, using the formal title she insisted on despite his repeated invitations to call him just Ross, "why don't you have a wife?" Zara nearly choked on her coffee. "Mary, that's not an appropriate question." Ross, however, didn't seem offended. He considered the question with the same seriousness he gave to all of Mary's inquiries. "Well, Miss Mary, I suppose I haven't found the right lady who'd want to put up with a man who splits his time between ranching and keeping the peace in Gila City." "But don't you get lonely in that big house all by yourself?" Mary persisted. A shadow crossed Ross's face briefly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I have good neighbors, and now I have you 3 as regular visitors, so it's less lonely than it used to be." "There was a lady once," Emma said unexpectedly. "Teresa told us. A teacher lady." Ross's expression froze for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "That was a while ago," he said carefully, glancing at Zara with a hint of embarrassment. "Sometimes things don't work out the way you expect." Sensing his discomfort, Zara quickly changed the subject. "Who wants molasses cookies for dessert?" The diversion worked. the girls immediately forgetting about Ross's romantic history in favor of sweets. Later, after the girls were in bed and Ross was helping Zara wash the dishes, another routine that had developed naturally, he brought up the subject himself. "About what Emma said," he began, handing Zara a clean plate. "I don't want you thinking I'm hiding some scandalous past." "It's none of my business," Zara replied quickly. Ross continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Her name was Charlotte Harding. She came from Boston to teach at the Gila City School 2 years ago. We courted for nearly 6 months." His hands stilled in the dishwater. "I asked her to marry me. She accepted. Then 3 weeks before the wedding, she announced she couldn't bear the thought of spending her life in such an uncivilized place and took the next stage back east." Zara's heart twisted with sympathy. "I'm sorry," he shrugged, resuming his washing. "It was for the best. Better to learn before the wedding that she hated Arizona than after." "Still, it must have been painful." Ross was quiet for a moment. "It was. Not so much losing her in the end, but realizing I'd misjudged her character so completely." He glanced at Zara. "I'm usually a better judge of people." The conversation shifted to other topics after that. But later, as Ross was preparing to leave, he paused at the door. "Zara," he said, using her given name with the careful deliberation he always showed. "I want you to know that the arrangement here, you and the girls staying in the cabin, it comes with no expectations beyond the caretaking duties we discussed. I know there might be talk in town, but you have my word." The sincerity in his eyes made Zara believe him completely. "I know," she said softly. "Thank you for saying it anyway." After he left, Zara sat for a long time on the cabin's porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear Arizona sky. She found herself thinking about Charlotte Harding, the Boston schoolteacher who had rejected this life and this man as too uncivilized. It seemed inconceivable to Zara, who had come to treasure the peace and beauty of the ranch, as well as the quiet strength of the man who owned it. She was startled from her reverie by the distant sound of approaching horses, several of them, moving at speed. Rising from her chair, she peered into the darkness, her heart quickening with unease. The riders came into view as they passed the main house, illuminated by the light spilling from Ross's windows. There were 3 of them, and even at a distance, Zara recognized the lead rider's slouched posture, Charles. Fear shot through her like lightning. She rushed inside, closing and bolting the door behind her before hurrying to check on her sleeping daughters. They were peaceful, unaware of the approaching threat. Zara grabbed the fireplace poker, a poor weapon, but the only one available, and positioned herself near the door, listening to the approaching hoofbeats with mounting dread. The riders pulled up outside the cabin with shouts and curses. Charles's voice, slurred with drink, carried clearly through the closed door. "Zara, get out here, woman. I've come to collect what's mine." She remained silent, clutching the poker with white knuckles. A heavy fist pounded on the door. "Open up, I know you're in there." "Go away, Charles," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "You sold your rights to me and the children. We don't belong to you anymore." Charles's laugh was ugly. "That's where you're wrong, wife. I've had a change of heart. Miss my little girls. And that deputy paid good money for you means you must be worth something after all." "He bought me to give me freedom, not to own me," Zara retorted, anger beginning to override her fear. "Mighty expensive charity," one of Charles's companions commented, followed by coarse laughter. The pounding on the door resumed, harder this time. "Open this door, or we'll break it down." Zara backed away, frantically considering her options. The cabin had a back door, but fleeing into the night with 3 small children seemed even more dangerous than staying put. She could only hope that Ross would hear the commotion and come to investigate. "Last chance, Zara," Charles warned, his voice taking on a dangerous edge she knew too well. Before she could respond, another voice cut through the night calm, authoritative and backed by the distinctive click of a rifle being cocked. "Step away from that door, Vellum." "Ross." Relief flooded through Zara. "Well, if it isn't the gallant deputy," Charles sneered. "Come to protect your investment. The lady asked you to leave," Ross replied evenly. "I suggest you do as she says." Zara moved to the window, carefully peering out to see Ross standing about 10 yards from the cabin, rifle raised. Miguel stood slightly behind him with a shotgun. Charles and his friends had turned their horses to face the newcomers, but they hadn't retreated. "This is between me and my wife," Charles insisted. "No business of yours, Parker." "Ex-wife," Ross corrected. "And as the owner of this property, it's very much my business when unwelcome visitors harass my employees." "Employees," Charles scoffed. "Is that what you call it? The whole town knows why you really bought her." Ross's expression didn't change, but his voice grew colder. "You have 10 seconds to ride off this property, Vellum. After that, I start shooting. I'll aim for your horse first, but if you make me take a second shot, I won't be so particular." There was a tense moment when Zara thought Charles might actually challenge Ross. But apparently, even drunk, he retained enough sense to recognize when he was outmatched. With a stream of curses, he wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over," he shouted over his shoulder as the 3 men rode away. "Those are my daughters, and I'll be back for them." Ross maintained his position until the riders disappeared into the darkness, then lowered his rifle and approached the cabin. "Zara, are you all right?" She unbolted the door with trembling hands. "We're fine. The girls slept through it all, thank goodness." Ross's face was grim in the lamplight. "I should have anticipated this. Charles Vellum isn't known for letting go of grudges or anything he considers his property." "Will he come back?" Zara asked, her momentary relief fading. "Possibly. Not tonight. I'll have Miguel keep watch just in case, but eventually." Ross ran a hand through his hair, thinking, "I need to make some inquiries. Charles has outstanding debts all over the territory. Might be enough leverage to convince him to leave you be." Zara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. He never cared about the girls before. Never showed them a moment's real affection. Why would he come for them now? "To hurt you," Ross said bluntly. "And because his pride was wounded when I outbid him at the auction. Men like Charles don't take public humiliation well." The truth of his assessment made Zara shudder. "What do we do?" Ross considered for a moment. "For now, stay close to the house. Don't go into town. I'll speak with Judge Wilson tomorrow about formalizing your separation legally. Charles sold you, which effectively ended your marriage in the eyes of frontier custom, but having legal papers would strengthen your position." The practical advice helped calm Zara's racing thoughts. "Thank you. Again. It seems I'm always thanking you for saving us." Ross shook his head. "No thanks needed. I just wish." He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. "Try to get some rest. I'll have Miguel patrol the property tonight, and I'll be back in the morning after I've been to town." After Ross left, Zara checked on her daughters once more before crawling into bed, though she doubted sleep would come easily. Charles's threats echoed in her mind, along with the realization that their peaceful new life was more fragile than she'd allowed herself to believe. Yet alongside these worries, Zara found herself drawing comfort from the memory of Ross standing firm against Charles, not because she was his property, as Charles had crudely suggested, but because he believed she deserved protection and respect. In her experience, such men were rare indeed. The next morning, Ross rode to town earlier than usual, returning just after midday with news that left Zara both relieved and uneasy. "Judge Wilson has agreed to issue a formal divorce decree," he explained as they sat at the cabin's table, speaking in low voices while the girls played outside under Teresa's watchful eye. Given the circumstances of the sale and Charles's documented history of gambling and drunkenness, the judge was sympathetic to your situation. That's good news, isn't it? Zara asked, sensing Ross was holding something back. He nodded slowly. It is, but there's more. Charles left town this morning apparently in quite a hurry. Word at the saloon is that he crossed the wrong card player in Phoenix last month and has a price on his head. That's likely why he came here last night needing money fast and thinking he could somehow profit from reclaiming you and the girls. Zara absorbed this information, uncertain how to feel about it. So he's gone, for good, for now at least. Men like Charles tend to circle back eventually, especially when they've made threats. Ross hesitated before continuing. There's something else you should know. Judge Wilson was clear that while he's granting the divorce, the matter of custody isn't settled. In the eyes of the law, fathers have presumptive rights to their children. Cold fear gripped Zara's heart. He could take my daughters, after everything. It's possible, though not likely given his character and circumstances. But to be safe, we should consider your options. Ross's expression was serious. The most secure path would be remarriage to a respectable man who could serve as a stepfather to the girls. The courts favor stable, two-parent households. Zara stared at him, momentarily speechless. Are you suggesting I find a husband simply for legal protection? I'm laying out the reality of your situation, Ross replied carefully. I don't like it any more than you do, but frontier law still treats women and children as dependents who require male guardianship. The unfairness of it stung, but Zara couldn't deny the truth of his words. After 6 years of marriage to Charles, she understood all too well how few rights women possessed. And who would you suggest as this convenient husband? The territorial governor, perhaps, or maybe Judge Wilson himself? Her tone was sharper than she'd intended, born of frustration. Ross didn't rise to her sarcasm. You're an attractive, capable woman, Zara. There would be no shortage of interested men if you were to consider remarriage. Men who would want a ready-made family with 3 daughters. I think you overestimate the market. She rose from the table, needing to move. Besides, I've had quite enough of marriage, thank you. One disastrous experience was sufficient. Not all men are like Charles, Ross said quietly. No, she agreed, turning to face him. Some are like you, kind and honorable. But such men are rare, and even they have their limits. You've done more than enough for us already. I won't trap some poor man into marriage just to secure my legal position. Ross stood as well, his height making the small cabin seem suddenly crowded. It wouldn't have to be a trap, Zara. It could be a partnership, a fresh start. Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. What exactly are you suggesting, Deputy Parker? He met her gaze steadily. I'm suggesting that if legal protection is what you need, I'm willing to provide it, if you'd consider marrying me. Zara felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. You can't be serious. I am. Completely serious. His expression was earnest, without a hint of the pity or calculation she might have expected. You need security for yourself and your daughters. I need. Well, this ranch is too big for one person. The main house too empty. It would be a practical arrangement beneficial to us both. A marriage of convenience, Zara stated flatly. Ross nodded. At first, yes, but with time perhaps it could become more. We get along well enough. The girls are already comfortable with me. It's not such an outlandish proposal, except that it was. Utterly outlandish that this man, who could surely have his pick of single women in the territory, would choose to bind himself to a divorced woman with 3 young daughters. A woman who brought nothing to the marriage but complications and the lingering threat of her former husband. "I need time to think," Zara said finally, her mind reeling. "Of course," Ross agreed immediately. "It's not a decision to make lightly, just consider it as an option." He reached for his hat, preparing to leave. "Whatever you decide, know that you and the girls are welcome here for as long as you want to stay. That doesn't change." After he left, Zara sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the morning's revelations. Charles was gone, at least temporarily, but the threat to her custody of the girls remained. And now, Ross Parker had offered the most unexpected solution: marriage to him. Part of her wanted to dismiss the idea outright. She'd sworn to herself after Charles that she would never again put her fate in a man's hands. Yet Ross had proven himself different from any man she'd known: reliable, kind, respectful of her independence. And if she were honest with herself, there had been moments over the past weeks when she'd caught herself watching him with the girls, noting the gentle patience he showed them, and wondering what it might be like to have such a man as a true partner in life. But marriage, so soon after escaping one disastrous union, the very thought made her pulse quicken with anxiety. Zara's contemplation was interrupted by Mary bursting through the door. "Mama, Teresa says we can help collect eggs from the chicken coop. Can we?" Forcing a smile, Zara nodded. "That sounds like fun. Just be gentle with the hens." As Mary raced back outside to join her sisters, Zara's thoughts returned to Ross's proposal. Whatever she decided, she knew one thing for certain: her choice would affect not just her own future, but the futures of those three precious girls who depended on her for everything. The weight of that responsibility pressed on her as she moved through the rest of her day, going through the motions of her usual tasks while her mind circled endlessly around the impossible decision before her. That night, after the girls were asleep, Zara sat on the cabin's porch watching the stars emerge, just as she had the night before. But tonight, instead of peaceful contemplation, her thoughts churned with uncertainty. The sound of soft footsteps made her look up to find Teresa approaching, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "May I join you?" the older woman asked. Zara nodded, grateful for the company. "Of course." Teresa settled into the second chair, studying Zara's face in the dim light. "You seem troubled, my friend. Is it because of those men who came last night? Miguel told me what happened." "Partly," Zara admitted. "But also, Ross came to see me today. He made an unexpected offer." Understanding dawned in Teresa's eyes. "Ah, he has proposed marriage." Surprised, Zara asked. "How did you know?" Teresa smiled. "I have known Senor Ross for 5 years. I have seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one notices, and I know he is a man who solves problems directly." She tilted her head. "You are not sure if you should accept?" "I don't know what to think," Zara confessed. "It seems so sudden, and he presents it as a practical arrangement, protection for me and the girls, companionship for him." She sighed. "My first marriage was a disaster. I'm not eager to rush into another." Teresa was silent for a moment, considering. "When Miguel and I first married, it was also how do you say, arrangement of practicality. My father had died, leaving our family farm without a man to work it. Miguel was a good worker needing a home. Our parents arranged it." "You didn't love each other?" Zara asked, surprised. "Not at first. We barely knew each other." Teresa smiled at the memory. "But Miguel was kind and hardworking. I was young and afraid, but determined to be a good wife. Little by little, day by day, love grew between us. Now, after 16 years, I cannot imagine my life without him." Zara absorbed this perspective, so different from her own experience of marriage, beginning with infatuation and ending in disillusionment. "So you think I should accept Ross's proposal?" "That I cannot say," Teresa replied. "Only you know what is in your heart. But I will tell you this. Senor Ross is a good man, the best I know. He would never treat you as your first husband did. He would respect you, protect your children, and in time, I believe he would love you deeply." She patted Zara's hand. Sometimes the arrangements we make for practical reasons become the foundations for our greatest happiness. After Teresa left, Zara remained on the porch, watching the vast expanse of stars and considering the older woman's words. She thought about Ross, his quiet strength, his gentle way with her daughters, his unfailing respect for her autonomy even while offering protection. She thought about Charles and the lingering threat he posed to her custody of the girls. And she thought about her own heart, which had begun to heal in these peaceful weeks on the ranch. Could she risk that fragile healing by entering another marriage? Or was the greater risk in refusing an alliance that could secure her children's future by dawn? Zara had made her decision. After breakfast, she sent the girls to play with Teresa's children and walked the short distance to the main house. She had never been inside before, and she hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps, suddenly uncertain. Before she could retreat, the door opened and Ross appeared. He looked as though he hadn't slept well, but his expression brightened at the sight of her. "Zara, good morning." "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, suddenly formal. "Not at all. I was just having coffee. Would you like some?" At her nod, he stepped back, inviting her inside. The main house was larger than the cabin, but not ostentatious, practical. Well built, with simple, sturdy furniture and few decorative touches. It spoke of a man who valued function over appearance. Ross led her to the kitchen, where a coffee pot sat on a cast iron stove. He poured her a cup, then refilled his own, watching her with careful eyes. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Zara began, cradling the warm cup between her hands. "And?" His voice was calm, but she noticed how tightly he gripped his own cup. Zara took a deep breath. "Before I give you my answer, I need to understand exactly what you're offering and what you expect in return." Ross set his coffee down and leaned against the counter, giving her his full attention. "Fair enough. I'm offering marriage legal protection for you and the girls, a secure home, financial stability. The main house has plenty of room for all of you. The girls would have their own bedrooms. You would have your own room as well, at least. At first." The implication hung in the air between them. Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks but pressed on. "And your expectations, practical ones, help running the household, companionship." He hesitated before adding, "The possibility of building a real marriage over time if that's what we both come to want. I won't pressure you, Zara. I give you my word on that." She studied him, searching for any hint of deception or ulterior motive, but found only sincerity in his steady gaze. "And if it doesn't work out, if we find we can't build that real marriage you speak of, then we maintain the arrangement as it stands, a partnership of mutual benefit." His expression softened. "I'm not Charles, Zara. I won't turn on you if you don't meet some arbitrary expectation. The vows I take will mean something to me." Zara believed him. That was perhaps the most startling realization of all, that despite her experience with Charles, she trusted this man she had known for only a few weeks. "There would be talk," she pointed out. "People will say you bought yourself a wife." Ross shrugged. "People always talk. What matters is what we know to be true." He took a step toward her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "And the truth is, I admire you, Zara. Your strength, your devotion to your daughters, your dignity in the face of terrible circumstances. Any man would be fortunate to have you as his wife." His words touched something deep inside her, a place that had been wounded by Charles's constant criticism and rejection. "You make a compelling case, Deputy Parker," she said softly. Is that a yes? He asked, a hint of hope in his voice. Zara took a deep breath. It's a yes, but with conditions. Name them. First, we don't rush. Give me a month to be certain this is the right decision for me and my girls. She held up a hand when he started to speak. Second, we're honest with each other always. No secrets, no hidden expectations. And third, she hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. Third, if I ever ask for my freedom, you grant it without question. Ross considered her conditions, then nodded slowly. The first two are easy to agree to, the third. He sighed. I won't hold you against your will, Zara, but I hope you'll give our marriage a fair chance before deciding it's failed. I will, she promised. I don't enter into this lightly, Ross. I'm trusting you with my future and my daughter's futures. That's not something I do easily after Charles. I understand. He reached out slowly and took her hand in his. 1 month, then. If you still feel this is right, we'll marry quietly, with just the girls and the Diazes as witnesses. The warmth of his hand around hers felt both comforting and strange, a physical connection she hadn't shared with a man since before Charles had started drinking heavily. 1 month, she agreed. True to his word, Ross made no attempt to rush Zara during the weeks that followed. Their routine continued much as before, though with subtle changes that reflected their new understanding. Ross invited Zara and the girls to Sunday dinners at the main house, helping them become familiar with what would eventually be their home. He began including Zara in discussions about the ranch operations, respecting her practical suggestions. And occasionally, when they found themselves alone, he would take her hand or touch her shoulder lightly, small gestures that gradually accustomed her to physical contact again. The girls, intuitive as children often are, sensed that something had changed between the adults. Mary, direct as always, confronted Zara one evening as she tucked them into bed. "Are you going to marry Deputy Ross?" she asked, her expression serious. Startled, Zara sat on the edge of the trundle bed. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "He looks at you the way Miguel looks at Teresa," Mary explained. "And you smile more when he's around, and he's teaching us to ride his gentle horse. That's what a papa would do." Zara glanced at Emma and Lucy, who were watching the exchange with wide eyes. "Would it upset you if I did marry him?" she asked carefully. "No," Mary exclaimed. "He's nice, and he likes us even though we're girls." "He doesn't shout," Emma added softly, "or break things." Lucy, who had been listening solemnly, offered her own endorsement. "He gives good hugs." Tears stung Zara's eyes at these simple, heartfelt assessments. "Yes, he does all those things," she agreed. "And yes, we are thinking about getting married, but not for a little while yet." "Will we live in the big house?" Mary asked eagerly. "If we marry, yes. You'd each have your own bedroom." This news was met with gasps of excitement. The idea of separate rooms was the height of luxury to children who had always shared sleeping quarters. "Can I have a blue room?" Emma asked, showing rare animation. "And I want yellow," Mary chimed in. "Pink," Lucy declared decisively. Zara laughed, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "We'll have to see what's possible. Now it's time for sleep." As the month drew to a close, Zara found herself looking forward to the future with an emotion she'd nearly forgotten: hope. Ross had proven himself consistently trustworthy, patient, and kind not just to her, but to her daughters, who had blossomed under his attentive care. On the final day of their agreed-upon waiting period, Ross invited Zara to ride with him to a ridge overlooking the ranch. Teresa agreed to watch the girls, giving them a rare opportunity for time alone together. They rode side by side, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the landscape. Ross led them to a beautiful spot where a lone cottonwood tree provided shade, and the view stretched for miles in every direction. After helping Zara dismount, Ross tied their horses to a low branch and spread a blanket beneath the tree. From his saddlebag, he produced a small basket containing bread, cheese, and a bottle of wine, a simple but thoughtful picnic. As they sat enjoying the food and the spectacular view, Ross turned to her. "The month is up," he said quietly. "Have you made your decision?" Zara looked out over the ranch, the main house, the cabin where she and her daughters had found refuge, the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. In the distance, she could see the Daya's children playing with her own girls near the chicken coop. "I have," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "My answer is yes, Ross. I will marry you." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "You've made me a very happy man, Zara." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I know this is primarily a practical arrangement, but I wanted you to have this regardless." He emptied the pouch into his palm, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect sapphire. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The one thing of hers I managed to keep after she was taken away." Zara's breath caught. The significance of him offering this particular ring, this connection to his lost mother, wasn't lost on her. "Ross, I couldn't possibly, please," he interrupted gently. "She would have wanted it to go to someone who understands what it means to fight for your children." He held the ring out to her. "Will you wear it?" With trembling fingers, Zara accepted the ring, slipping it onto her left hand. The gold felt warm against her skin, the sapphire catching the late afternoon light. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." Ross took her hand, his thumb brushing over the ring. "We'll be married next Saturday if that suits you. Judge Wilson has agreed to come to the ranch to perform the ceremony. Just a small gathering, the Diazes, the girls, perhaps a few of my ranch hands." "That sounds perfect," Zara agreed, surprising herself with how right it felt. This wasn't the romantic whirlwind she'd experienced with Charles, but something steadier, more grounded in reality, yet no less meaningful. Ross hesitated, then leaned forward slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away. When she didn't, he pressed his lips gently to hers in their first kiss. It was brief and chaste, but Zara felt something stir within her that she'd thought long dead, a flicker of desire, a yearning for connection that went beyond the practical arrangement they'd discussed. When Ross drew back, his eyes were darker, his expression a mix of hope and restraint. "Was that all right?" he asked softly. Zara nodded, suddenly shy. "Yes." They remained on the ridge until sunset painted the sky in spectacular hues of orange and purple. As they rode back to the ranch, Zara found herself looking at the familiar landscape with new eyes, seeing it not just as a temporary refuge, but as home. The wedding took place, as planned, on a clear Saturday morning in early October. Teresa and her daughters had helped decorate the ranch house porch with late blooming wildflowers and ribbons, creating a festive atmosphere without excessive fuss. Zara wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that Teresa had altered to fit her perfectly, and carried a small bouquet of desert flowers. Mary, Emma, and Lucy wore matching dresses sewn by Teresa, their excitement making them almost unable to stand still as Judge Wilson performed the brief ceremony. Ross, dressed in a crisp white shirt and black suit that Zara had never seen him wear before, spoke his vows in a clear, steady voice that carried across the gathering of friends. When he slipped the sapphire ring back onto her finger, removed temporarily for the ceremony, his hands were gentle but sure. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona," Judge Wilson concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." With a smile, he added, "You may kiss your bride, Deputy Parker." Ross's kiss was gentle but less hesitant than their first, a promise of the partnership they were building. The small gathering erupted in cheers, with Mary leading the celebration by throwing flower petals she'd been saving for this moment. The wedding feast that followed was far grander than Zara had expected. Teresa had outdone herself with a spread of traditional Mexican dishes alongside American favorites, while Miguel had roasted a whole pig in a pit dug specially for the occasion. There was music from a guitar played by one of the ranch hands, and even dancing on the packed earth of the yard. Throughout the celebration, Zara found herself watching Ross with her daughters, the way he made sure they had the best portions of food, how he danced with each of them in turn, his patient answers to Mary's endless questions. This was a man, she realized, who already loved her children as his own. As evening approached, the Diazes took charge of the girls, who were spending the night in their home to give the newlyweds privacy. The farewells were tearful on Lucy's part, but the promise of playing with Alina's kitten eventually won her over. When the last guest had departed, and Ross and Zara were alone in the main house, now their home, a moment of awkwardness descended. Despite the weeks of preparation, the reality of being husband and wife suddenly felt overwhelming. "Would you like to see the rest of the house?" Ross offered, sensing her nervousness. "I realize you've only seen parts of it." Grateful for the distraction, Zara nodded. "Yes, I'd like that." Ross led her through the rooms she already knew, the parlor, dining room, and kitchen, before showing her the study where he kept the ranch accounts. A small library filled with more books than she'd expected. And finally, the upstairs bedrooms. "The girls' rooms," he explained, opening doors to 3 modest but pleasant chambers. True to his promise, he had prepared for their preferences. One room had blue curtains, another yellow walls, and the third a pink coverlet on the bed. Teresa helped with the colors. "I hope they're right." "They're perfect," Zara assured him, touched by the thoughtfulness. "The girls will be thrilled." At the end of the hall was a larger bedroom with a substantial 4-poster bed, a dresser, wardrobe, and 2 comfortable chairs positioned near the window that overlooked the ranch. "Our room," Ross said, then hastily added, "or yours if you prefer. I can sleep in the room across the hall until you're ready for more." Zara appreciated his sensitivity, but after a moment's consideration she shook her head. "No, this is our room, Ross. We are married after all." Relief and something warmer flickered in his eyes. "Yes, we are." He reached for her hand, the gold band on her finger still new and unfamiliar. "But I meant what I said before, Zara. I won't rush you, I know." She squeezed his hand, drawing confidence from his patience. "And I trust you." Later, after changing into a nightgown behind a discreet screen Teresa had thoughtfully placed in the bedroom, Zara joined Ross in the bed that now belonged to both of them. The initial awkwardness gradually gave way to a tender exploration, guided by Ross's gentle patience and Zara's growing trust. In Charles's arms, she had always felt like a possession being used. In Ross's embrace, she discovered what it meant to be treasured, to be seen not as an object or a disappointment, but as a woman worthy of tenderness and desire. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms with her head on his chest, Zara felt a peace she had never known in her previous marriage. This union, begun as a practical arrangement, had already become something more meaningful, a true partnership founded on mutual respect and growing affection. "Are you all right?" Ross murmured against her hair, his hand tracing slow circles on her back. "Yes," she replied truthfully, "better than all right." She felt his smile against her temple. "Good, that's good." As sleep claimed her, Zara's last conscious thought was that perhaps Teresa had been right. Sometimes the arrangements we make for practical reasons do indeed become the foundations for our greatest happiness. The adjustment to life as a family came with surprising ease. The girls took to their new home and status as if they had always been meant to be there, each claiming her color-coordinated bedroom with delight. Ross proved to be a natural father, firm but kind, setting reasonable boundaries while encouraging the girls' natural curiosity about ranch life. For Zara, the transition from dependent to ranch wife and stepmother brought both challenges and joys. Ross insisted that she have full access to the ranch accounts and learn every aspect of the business in case anything happens to me, he explained, though Zara preferred not to dwell on that possibility. She discovered an aptitude for record-keeping that complemented Ross's more hands-on approach to ranch management. Their marriage grew stronger with each passing month. What had begun as mutual respect deepened into genuine affection, and the physical aspect of their relationship blossomed from tentative exploration to passionate connection. Ross was a considerate lover who took pleasure in Zara's enjoyment, healing the wounds Charles had inflicted on her sense of womanhood. By their 6-month anniversary, Zara realized with mild shock that she had fallen completely in love with her husband. The practical arrangement had transformed into a union of hearts, just as Ross had hoped. It was around this time that news reached them of Zara Vellum's fate. A letter arrived from the sheriff in Tucson, informing Ross that Charles had been killed in a saloon dispute after being caught cheating at cards. "I don't know how to feel," Zara confessed that night as they sat on the porch after the girls were asleep. "He was their father, however poor a one." "You don't have to feel anything in particular," Ross assured her, his arm around her shoulders. "Relief that the threat is gone, sadness for what might have been, anger for what he did, all are valid." "The girls barely mention him anymore," Zara observed. "Should we tell them?" Ross considered this. "I think we should, but simply. They're young, but they deserve the truth." The next day, they gathered the girls in the parlor and gently explained that their birth father had died. Mary, now 6, asked practical questions about where he was buried. Emma, 5, wanted to know if he was with the angels, which led to a theological discussion Ross handled with surprising grace. Lucy, who had just turned 3, showed little reaction, having few memories of Charles. "Are you sad, Mama?" Mary asked, watching Zara's face carefully. Zara chose her words with care. "I'm sad that your father never got to know what wonderful girls you are, but I'm not sad that we're here with Ross now." Mary nodded, satisfied with this answer. "I think Ross is a better papa anyway," she declared with the brutal honesty of childhood. Ross cleared his throat, clearly moved. "That's a mighty nice thing to say, Miss Mary. I'm doing my best." "You're the best papa," Emma confirmed seriously, while Lucy punctuated the sentiment by climbing onto Ross's lap and planting a sticky kiss on his cheek. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Zara found Ross standing at the window, staring out at the star-filled sky. "Are you all right?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "Just thinking," he replied, drawing her against his side, "about how close I came to missing this life if I hadn't been in town that day for the auction." The thought sent a chill through Zara. "But you were," she reminded him, leaning into his warmth. "Because my sister Sarah's letter arrived that morning, reminding me it was the anniversary of when our mother was sold." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I always mark the day by doing some small kindness in her memory. I never imagined that this particular act would change my life so completely." Zara turned in his arms to face him. "I've never properly thanked you, Ross. Not just for saving us from Charles, but for everything since, for treating my daughters as your own, for your patience with me, for making a true home for us all." Ross shook his head. "No thanks needed. You've given me as much as I've given you, Zara, a family, purpose, love." He cupped her face gently. "I never expected to find all that when I rode into town that day." Nor did I, she admitted. I was just trying to survive. I never dreamed I might actually be happy again. Their kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of the bond that had grown between them stronger than the practical arrangement they had initially agreed to, deeper than either had anticipated. When spring arrived the following year, bringing wildflowers and new calves to the ranch, it brought another change as well. Zara discovered she was expecting a child. She shared the news with Ross one evening after the girls were asleep, half fearful of his reaction, despite knowing his gentle nature. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, watching his face carefully. For a moment he seemed stunned, then a smile of such pure joy transformed his features that any doubts she harbored vanished instantly. "A baby," he whispered, reaching for her hands. "Our baby," Zara nodded, her own smile growing to match his. "Due in late October, the doctor thinks." Ross gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. "I didn't think I could be happier than you've already made me," he murmured against her hair. "I was wrong." The girls received the news with varying degrees of understanding. Mary was ecstatic at the prospect of a new sibling, immediately volunteering to help with the baby. Emma was more reserved, needing reassurance that she wouldn't be replaced in her parents' affections. Lucy, not quite 4, was primarily concerned with whether the baby would play with her toys. "What if it's a boy?" Mary asked one evening as Ross read them their bedtime story, a nightly ritual he never missed regardless of how busy the ranch kept him. Ross set the book aside, giving the question his full attention. "Then we'll have a son to go along with our 3 wonderful daughters," he replied simply. Mary studied him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see straight to the heart of things. "But boys are better, right? That's what our old papa said." "Your old papa was wrong about many things," Ross said firmly. "Boys aren't better than girls, just different sometimes. And every child is a blessing, boy or girl." "But don't you want a son?" Mary persisted, clearly troubled by some memory of Charles's dismissive treatment. Ross gathered all 3 girls closer on the bed. "Listen to me, my smart girls. I already have everything a man could want in his children, Mary with her curious mind, Emma with her gentle heart, and Lucy with her adventurous spirit. If this new baby is a boy, I'll love him just as much as I love all of you. And if it's another girl, I'll be the proudest father in Arizona territory with 4 amazing daughters." His words, spoken with such conviction, seemed to settle something in all 3 girls. They returned to their story with contentment, the question of the baby's gender no longer a concern. That night, as Zara and Ross lay in bed, her head on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You know," she said softly, "when you outbid Charles at that auction, I thought you were just being kind, maybe even pitying me. I never imagined we would end up here." Ross's fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I didn't either, not at first. But I knew from that first day, watching you gather your daughters in the dust of that auction block, that you were extraordinary. Your dignity, your protective love for them despite everything Charles had done, it humbled me." Zara stretched up to press a kiss to his jaw, now rough with evening stubble. "And what you said that day about daughters being a blessing too, you truly meant it." "With all my heart," he confirmed. "My sisters saved me after our mother was taken away. They taught me to cook, to mend my clothes, to have faith when everything seemed darkest. Without them, I might have become bitter, angry like so many men out here." He placed his hand gently on her growing belly. "Boy or girl, this child will be cherished, just as Mary, Emma, and Lucy are cherished." "I know," Zara whispered, covering his hand with her own. "That's why I love you, Ross Parker." His arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Zara Parker, more than I ever thought possible. When October arrived, painting the landscape in golds and reds, Zara went into labor on a clear, cool morning. The girls were sent to stay with the Diazes while Teresa, who had assisted at dozens of births, came to help. Ross, refusing to be banished as most men would be, remained nearby, bringing water and towels as needed and offering steady support. After 6 hours of labor, far easier than her previous deliveries, Zara gave birth to a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. "A son," Teresa announced, placing the swaddled infant in Zara's arms. "Strong and perfect." Ross, who had been holding Zara's hand through the final pushes, leaned down to see his child. The expression on his face, wonder, love, and profound gratitude, brought tears to Zara's eyes. "Would you like to hold him?" she asked softly, with careful movements. Ross took the tiny bundle, cradling his son with hands that managed cattle and enforced the law yet could be so infinitely gentle. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to our family." They named him Daniel Robert Parker, Daniel after Zara's father, and Robert after Ross's. When the girls were brought in to meet their new brother, their reactions were precious to behold. Mary immediately began listing all the things she would teach him. Emma touched his tiny hand with reverent gentleness, and Lucy announced that he looked like a red potato, but cute. That evening, with the baby sleeping in a cradle beside their bed, Ross sat on the edge of the mattress watching Zara as she rested. "Happy?" he asked, his voice low so as not to wake Daniel. Zara reached for his hand, squeezing it weakly. "Completely." "Are you disappointed it wasn't another daughter?" Ross laughed softly. "How could I be disappointed with such a perfect son? But no, I would have been just as happy with a 5th daughter." "5th?" Zara questioned. Ross nodded, his expression serious. "Mary, Emma, and Lucy became my daughters the day I married you, Zara. Not stepdaughters, daughters in every way that matters." Tears welled in Zara's eyes. "You're an extraordinary man, Ross Parker." He leaned down to kiss her forehead. "No, just a man who recognizes his blessings when he sees them." As twilight deepened outside their window, Zara reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. From the humiliation of being sold on an auction block to the joy of lying in a warm bed with her beloved husband and newborn son, while 3 precious daughters slept safely down the hall, it was a transformation she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking?" Ross asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That sometimes the darkest moments of our lives lead us to the brightest," she replied. "If Charles hadn't put me on that auction block, I would never have found you." Ross nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And I would never have found the family I didn't even know I was looking for." He glanced at their sleeping son, then back at Zara. "But I'm glad I was there that day, when a cruel man couldn't see the blessing of daughters." "And a good man could," Zara finished for him, her heart full of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought Deputy Ross Parker to that auction in Gila City, and for the wisdom of his simple words that day. Daughters are a blessing too. As the Arizona night settled fully around their home, the Parker family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other exactly what they needed. Not a practical arrangement, but a love strong enough to transform lives and heal hearts long broken by cruelty and loss. And in years to come, when Daniel was joined by 2 more sisters, Ross would often be heard telling friends with obvious pride, "5 daughters and a son, I'm the richest man in the territory."